Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Sonia.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. We are now going to get started with the webinar on how to launch your brand in China in 30 days with trade partner WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Before we begin, I just want to take a quick moment to introduce myself. I am Sonia Vieira, and I am the Global Trade Director on the Global Trade team here at EDC, and I look after the consumer, food, and agriculture space. I am joined by my colleague Miriam Feltham-Lozon, who also covers consumer food, as well as consumer non-food products as well. And so if there's any companies on the line who are in the retail non-food space, then Miriam would be a great contact for you as well. We also have my colleague Brian, who's also the lead for non-food. However, he's currently on paternity leave at the moment. Just gonna switch slides here. A bit of a delay. Apologies for that. There we go. So today I will give you a brief overview of EDC and who we are, and then I'll be introducing you to Joseph Cook at WPIC, who will be providing an overview of who they are and the various tools and resources as well as solutions that they can provide to Canadian companies. He'll also go over the steps for Canadian companies such as yourselves who are looking to launch their brand in China. He'll also provide some key insights on Chinese markets, as well as insights from brands within the food and health and apparel sectors. And then finally, we will conclude the webinar with a Q&A session at the end. We will ask that participants stay on mute throughout the webinar. However, you can submit your questions directly to the Q&A coordinator, which will be myself, via the chat box that you will find on the right-hand side of your screen, and I'll be monitoring those questions that are coming through throughout the webinar. So change slides here. So EDC is Canada's export credit agency, and we are close partners with various stakeholders in Canada, such as the Trade Commissioner Service, who you might know very well, both in China and around the world. We also work with provincial and federal partners. As myself, I work specifically with the in the food and agriculture sector partners, but EDC does work with all sectors within Canada. We are a financial crown corporation. We're wholly owned by the Government of Canada. So what that means is that we operate at arm's length, and our mandate is derived from the government. We're financially self-sustained, and we operate on commercial principles, and we benefit from the Government of Canada's AAA credit rating. Our mission is simple. We are really here to clearly help Canadian companies grow, and succeed in markets across the world. We have representation across Canada. We have 22 offices located in all parts of the country. So if you're a Canadian exporter looking to access risk mitigation tools, understand a little bit more about how EDC can support you, there's a local contact for you pretty much wherever you're located across Canada. I think I had the wrong map there, but yeah, this is our coast-to-coast presence in Canada. And then this one here, this is our global network. This is our on-the-ground representation with 20 offices around the world who are mainly focused on key emerging markets. And for China, we've actually taken the long view, and we certainly recognize the importance and long-term strategic value of China that it provides to Canadian exporters. So we have offices in Shanghai and Beijing, and both of our representatives have been there for many years, and that's just one of the ways that we help facilitate business in the country. So in terms of how EDC can come to the table and help Canadian companies, whether they're small or large, and who are looking for opportunities in China or any other market abroad, if for that matter. This is sort of a broad summary of our solutions that EDC provides. I won't go into too much detail today, but please don't hesitate to contact me after the webinar if you have any questions with regards to any one of these solutions. So for insurance, it is there to help protect against risk of doing business abroad. So whether you have concern about being paid by your customer or other risks, we're here to help advise you on those and provide some solutions to take away those risks. For financing, it's mainly there to help Canadian companies to get just more access to capital. We do that through a variety of tools, such as our Export Guarantee Program, but I won't be getting into that today. So for the next two solutions, I'll actually go over them in the next two slides. So for the knowledge and connections. So for the knowledge side, this is what we call our Export Hub. It is a series of online resources that is available on our website. It is completely free of charge. A lot of what it is designed to do is to help you on your early stages of research as you begin to explore opportunities in a new market. So there's a wealth of information on there. You'll see market reports, webinars from past webinars that were done that EDC has hosted. There's an EDC's country position overview. So there's just a wealth of information there that would be quite useful for Canadian exporters. As you will see, I've included a link to the website for you to review. And if you're interested in getting more information, I strongly encourage you to click on the link there. So this is where I'll get into EDC's Business Connections program, and this is actually the team that Miriam and I work in. As you already know, China being a large and dynamic market can seem pretty daunting at first when thinking about selling there. And one of the parts of being successful in a market is really having a strong network and connections. So this is where I believe the Business Connections program can help you. So the way it works is that we develop strong relationships by leveraging our Business Connections financing program with international companies who have been vetted and curated in advance and who we know are committed to working with Canadian suppliers. And in turn, how we help Canadian companies expand to these global markets is by introducing them to those high potential international buyers that we've built those close relationships with. And we do that through the connections that we make through various ways, including matchmaking events and B2Bs. And particularly during these circumstances, we have actually mainly focused on conducting virtual B2B programs with Canadian suppliers and international companies that have actually been quite successful. So to wrap up the EDC overview, as you can see, we have a great deal of resources available to you through our financial solutions, our knowledge, and our Business Connections program. And so my recommendation to you is, to take advantage of as many of these resources as much as possible when you're developing your strategy before heading into market. So with that, I will conclude the EDC presentation. And I'm just going to flip it over to the next slide. Okay. And I'll just take a moment and introduce you to Joseph Cook, who is the founder and president of WPIC. He is based in Vancouver and oversees global business development for WPIC. Joseph has actually lived in China for several years, so he holds a wealth of information and expertise on the market, and I believe would be a fantastic contact. So thank you, Joseph, for joining us today, and I will pass it on to you.
Great. Thank you, Sonia. Thanks, everybody, for joining today. Pleased to have you all on the call and to be going through the topic today. Yeah, as outlined, I'm one of the partners at WPIC, and pleased to be talking about what we're doing inside the market right now. Right now, we're going to talk a little bit about an e-commerce accelerator program, our second batch that's active right now. I'll talk a little bit about what we did during the first batch, but ultimately, at the end of the day, the punchline in all of this is about how to design, develop, and deploy brands inside the market in a pretty fast amount of time, 30 days ideally. Brief little intro in terms of WPIC and what we're doing. We've been in the market for 16, 17 years. We started the company in Beijing a while back, founded by two Canadians, Jacob Cook and myself, my brother, two Canadians basically living in China, and built an early tech company sort of back in the early days of internet and internet technologies in China. Since then, we've built the business out, across APAC, through locations in Beijing, Nanjing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Osaka, as well as here in Vancouver, where I'm based right now. Over those years, we've worked with well in excess of 450, maybe 500 brands, big brands, small brands from all over the world who are looking to enter the market or who are in the market and are looking to grow, primarily leveraging growth as that key lever for growth inside the market. We have a resource count of about 220, give or take, in the market. So we're, fairly sort of mid-size with how we operate. We like to describe ourselves as being fairly sector agnostic. We don't really, focus primarily in one general key area. We work in all sectors, working with brands of all different shapes and sizes, doing, all sorts of different types of things. We have large brands in the portfolio, and that sometimes then leads a smaller or a medium-sized brand to, suggest that maybe they are not applicable to leverage what China has to offer. And sometimes actually the larger brands say the same sorts of things. But at the end of the day, it's about systems that we've built. It's about identifying opportunity. It's about leveraging the muscle memory that we've built over the years in order to build the right solution and the right system for an organization out of Canada, no matter what its size or what its sector, so that it can get fast, quick, direct access to the consumer market in China so they can build up their exports out into that market. This is the outline of generally what the accelerator program is. We launched our first batch accelerator program back in late March of this year. We were inundated with phone calls and inquiries, listening to stories of brands talking about how obviously retail had flatlined, exporting into the U.S. had flatlined. We were hearing stories about large orders sitting on loading bays collecting dust, whether it was perishable food products or whether it was perishable seasonal products such as like apparel that really don't have a lot of applicability past spring or past summer. The message that we were hearing loud and clear was that organizations wanted to find liquidation channels really quickly in order to do something about the situation. We then turned around, started to deal directly with Tmall and JD. And for those that don't know, Tmall and JD are China's equivalents of Amazon, so to speak. They collectively make up 90–95% of the e-commerce market in China, and we do a lot of work with both of those platforms. So we work directly with both Tmall and JD. We try to identify ways in order to speed up programming to get brands live. Traditionally, when a brand says that they want to go live in China, it can be anywhere between 3 to 6 months to go from decision to the first sale. That wasn't really going to work with what we were looking at. So what we wanted to do was build something that was going to allow for them to activate quick. And in the end, both the platforms responded really positively, and we were able to build a process that got that lead time down from 3 to 6 months down to about 30 days to get live inside the market. One of the key benefits of that, if we go back to where we were at in late March or in early April, was that we were looking forward to 6/18 or June 18th. And this is one of these this is one of two very important consumer purchasing events in China, whereby we have humongous surges in e-commerce revenue in China. And we were predicting that 6/18 or June 18th in China of this year was going to be the world's single most important consumer purchasing event for the first half of the year. So it was critical for us to get brands up live in the market and qualified for 6/18. And so briefly walking through what we learned from that program and then moving forward for batch 2, we've tried to break everything down into 6 really clean steps. The first thing that we're doing within the first couple of days is we're building the launch strategy. We're using a piece of software we have called Descripto, which is a distributed script engine, which is effectively a high-powered piece of software, which allows us to download the Chinese internet. So we deploy Descripto to take a client or a brand's portfolio and what their product categories are and identify what that macro opportunity looks like. For example, there might be $500 million a year in receipts. Maybe there's 10 million a year in receipts. Identify which competitors are doing which level of revenue and effectively pinpoint what that revenue target and merchandising mix should be. This is one of the first things that we do within the first couple of days, determine runway and what those targets need to be in order to move forward. The second thing we're doing in that first week, generally speaking, is we're registering with the platforms in order to file the application to get the brands approved to participate in both Tmall and or JD. Now, one of the things that we're able to do based on how we're set up is we're able to offer our business infrastructure to be a merchant of record for Canadian brands. And so if we're going to be the merchant of record for a brand, what this means is this mitigates the requirement for a Canadian company to have a business license in China. So in effect, we can act similarly to like a distributor in that we can become the merchant for the brand. However, the merchant still can own that channel outright rather than passing up the rights to a distributor. We then file for the deposits and the bonds. We get the merchant account set up. We create the merchant of record documentation. And in effect, the accounts are registered. And that's all happening within about roughly the first week. We get into the creative concepts, the designs. We have a really, really great sort of systematic process in order to take a Canadian brand that's been built over the years, that's struggled really hard and fought for brand position in the market, to then localize that brand position for China's market in an applicable and appropriate manner so that it resonates really well with the consumer market in China. Also the localization of the SKUs, and you identify some deltas in there. So a typical e-commerce product page in China might have 15 to 20 photos of an individual product, whereas in Canada or the US, you're typically dealing with about 3 to 4 different photos. So we're managing all of that process. We have photo labs and studios where we can do shots, apparel shots, product shots, any different type of design around that. But in effect, we're handling all that UX, that front-end design and localization to get the stores ready to go live. And we're really inside of about 2 weeks at that stage. We can also function as being a receiver of record. So our ability to function as a receiver of record means, that we can go directly to a loading bay in Canada or the US, and we can grab that product and ship it all the way to China, get it through customs, process the duties, and get it into our warehouses and then into the local logistics network. Or the brand can send the product to us. We get the call when that product hits the border and customs. We process the duties, and then we get it inside the market as well. We own about 6 warehouses across the market. Sometimes we need larger space. So we have leases on many more, and of course we're then plugged into the equivalents of like the FedEx and the UPSs of China as well if we need something significantly larger also. The other thing that we're doing right at the end of the last mile there is we're appointing the CSR agents or the customer service representative agents. So it's no mystery that in China, roughly 70 to 80% of all customers that go to an e-commerce store are wanting to engage in some level of online chat or interactivity with the brand itself. So appointing and having CSR agents on deck ready to respond inside of 5 seconds is a critical element of that. And so this now gets us ready to go into the launch process to launch the store in and around that 1 month process. One of the things we're working on, of course, as we go through this whole process is the revenue acceleration. And so this is the designing and the development of all the general marketing assets, the activation of the in-platform marketing and the traffic programs. We can usually acquire on solid brand or product-based campaigns, usually a ROAS or a return on ad spend of anywhere between about 7 or 13 to 1. So really, really strong ROIs in terms of media deployment inside the market. And this is for all the programs that we activate inside those platforms. So you look at Tmall, you look at JD, these are huge e-commerce platforms with tremendous opportunity. We really want to focus that first phase on maximizing out our highest ROI traffic inside those ecosystems. And then once we maximize those up, then we start to build the blast radius outside the platform. Now, for Batch 1 Accelerator, of course, getting live in May so that we could get brands approved for the 618 Festival was really, really critical to that success and really, really critical to allow for brands to get live and shorten that ramp-up period. For Batch 2, we've got an even greater opportunity with 11/11 also known as Singles Day, which falls on November 11th of every year. This, of course, is the highly coveted event of the year. This is without question the world's single most important e-commerce and retail consumer purchasing event in the world. So in order to qualify for that, what we're doing right now is we're pushing to get brands live inside of August to get them in for the preheat event or the test run, which is the 9/9 or the September 9th event. And if we get a decent showing on September 9th, then we get automatic approval to participate in 11/11. And to put it in general perspective, this now takes a ramp up or a build up period of roughly 6 to 7 months and gets that down to about 50 days once go live is. So in effect, programs start to be cash flow positive in about 2 months of going live, which is obviously highly desirable inside the Canadian brand market. Other things that we can do in this process, obviously launching things like social media, engaging KOLs, activating the live streaming marketing systems, which is a pretty active process right now as well. And then most importantly, for everybody, in the point of sale, right, where the money exchanges hands. And so the way the systems work inside the market is back to when we set up the merchant of record accounts. The customers pay for the product gets picked and packed the same day, gets shipped, usually delivered within a day or two maximum. That money then sits in an escrow for 7 days, and on the 7th day, that's released to the settlement merchant account inside China. We are a licensed Forex buyer in the market, which means that then we basically remit the taxes and we can expatriate Canadian or USD back to Canada. So in the aggregate, it's an effective product in and money out process. So fairly complete all in all. Looking ahead, just in a couple of general cases here, examples of apparel brands out of the U.S. going live on Tmall Global in about 40 days for these guys. Successful brand, hot new brand coming out of Silicon Valley, pushing them live. Canadian food exporter, just over a month going live on Tmall Global, getting live inside the market and participating in all of the hot promotional events that are taking place. Getting product approved in through the market, pre-qualified, handling products going through customs, and effectively building a really, really strong direct B2C channel inside the market, which is really exciting. Australian-based consumer products, Bellroy, always been a hot D2C brand out there in the market. Really fast deployment here. About 24 days, launching on both Tmall and JD, getting live for 6/18, and just blowing out the existing competitive set inside the market on a really fast program, and just being really focused with how they're going about it. Even something more complicated like jewelry, launching, U.S. brand Blue Nile up from Seattle there into a direct-to-consumer JD program inside the market, launching exactly at 1 month, and having a record-setting 6/18 festival, and competing heavily with the existing jewelry players and diamond sellers inside the market. And these guys will experience a pretty strong second half of the year as well. Beauty brands, cosmetics brands, one of the more regulated spaces inside the market, but UK-based company. Cosmetics and beauty always undergo, I'd say, probably 2 to 3 extra levels of audits and approvals from the platforms, and then you get a little bit of government compliance stuff as well with document submission. But nonetheless, still getting live, going quick, and participating in 6/18. These guys are based out of the UK, and then we're pulling into the logistics network directly from the UK directly into China through a pretty fast and seamless program. And then lastly, an interesting example in that when we look at children's products or toys or kids' education, probably one of the most complicated spaces inside the market, in that there's always extra scrutiny when it comes to anything child or kid related inside the market, and getting these guys approved, set up, and launched inside the market. An example like Safari is they still have an existing distributor inside the market. And so we're able to launch, build an online channel, and the distributors can keep the offline channel and still be able to progress forward accordingly. When we look from a bird's eye view, generally what this timeline is, As I mentioned, July is our open period to, start to court in and pre-qualify brands to participate. August is really going to be all about activation and store development, pushing brands live inside of this period. We'll be targeting getting guys live and pre-approved to participate in the 9/9 to the September 9th festival, and then this pre-qualifies them to participate in the 11/11 or the Singles Day festival. And of course, again, that's the highly coveted world's most important consumer purchasing event that takes place. And so that'll be kind of our big target as we look ahead in it. Lots of nuance, lots of complexity. Obviously, we're happy to answer questions. We're happy to look, discuss, define, pre-audit, pre-qual, and really just have that general kind of conversation of, is this right for me? And if it is right for me, what does this look like? And how do we think about activating this? So, Sonia, I think that's probably, I'll press pause there.
Great. Thank you, Joseph. That was a fantastic overview, and I imagine it was very useful and interesting to our listeners. So now we'll be entering the Q&A session, and I will turn it over to the chat box for questions. And just a reminder, and if you haven't done so already, please send your questions to the Q&A coordinator via the chat box, and I will be filtering through the questions. And I'll be asking them directly to Joseph, or if you have any questions for myself as well, I'd be happy to answer any of them. And just as an aside, we also have another WPIC team member, Peter McMath, who's the VP of Business Development and Partnerships, who is currently on standby. And if you'd like to schedule a private one-on-one, even if you'd like to just start now or just right after the webinar, Peter will be available to answer any questions you may have. All right, so we can begin the Q&A. So Joseph, at EDC, we actually work with a lot of, small to medium enterprises. And a lot of the questions we have, is given that I'm a small brand or a small business, does this make sense for me? So can you talk a little bit more about, how does this make sense? Is it good for small or big brands?
Sure. Yeah, that's a common question, Sonia. The most important question really is less about big company, small company. Brands look at companies that we work with and they're immediately attracted to, like, the Lululemons or the Nikes or something like that, right? Suggest, well, we're not that, so how can we do this? That's really not the point, right? That's the wrong question to ask. The question to ask is, what does a brand want to get out of this? And that can really be boiled down to like a single number. And the exercise I try and walk folks through is, best case scenario, like realistically best case scenario, if you were to launch inside the market and you ran that business for a year, at the end of that first year, what do you want this business to look like? How big of a business do you want this to be? AKA, what's the revenue number that's going to make everybody feel like that was a win? And some brands will say to us, if I can get live and do 20 grand in sales by the end of the year, that's a really, really sweet success story for us. And that's okay. And that's a legit target. And that's a business plan right there, right? And on the other end of the spectrum, brands might say to us, if we don't do 25 million US in the first year, nobody's going to care over here. That's also a totally legit target, and that's a business plan. But those are two very, very different business plans, right, on how to activate and achieve those types of things. So that's the first thing to kind of just establish and figure out what that is. Once we figure out what that is, then we can design and develop and help kind of guide on what that process should look like in order to hit that target. For this program, when we look at, the accelerator, when we talk about going to Tmall and launching, there are hard costs to get a brand up and running inside the market. And so, there needs to be enough inertia on that to be able to get brands up and out of the door, right? But ultimately, we can talk a bit about what that looks like. But from, is this right for me? Just key gut check questions, right? Do you have the capabilities to export, right? Do you export right now to the US? So at least you have some of those initial systems based in terms of your outbound. Do you have any thought around, is there any general demand inside China? And you can sort of run through the categories, right? Food, huge demand in China for non-China packaged food, right? Humongous demand. That's always going to be a win across the board. And especially post-COVID, that's a sector that's up about 468%, I think, if we look at H1 versus H1 of last year. So tremendous growth in that area and growing even faster. Things around personal care, huge growth. Health and beauty, always a huge space. Anything child, baby related, also big, big spaces. You know, so when we look at the numbers of where things are growing inside China, yeah, tourism, travel accessories could potentially be a bit of a struggle. But most other sectors we're seeing really, really strong growth. So, you know, we would always encourage a brand, you know, to really sort of investigate and understand what some of those metrics are to determine viability.
Great, thank you. So you kind of touched a bit on it, but a lot of the questions that we do receive is, of course, you know, how much does it cost? So can you talk a little bit more about that, what a company should expect, and what's the type of revenue that they should anticipate seeing if they were to launch on the platform?
Sure, yeah. So just further to that point there on revenue targets, right? So in terms of the qualification level, I would say at the low end, a brand probably wants to target at a minimum about $500,000 in revenue. That's probably where you need to have a target to get the program cash flow positive. And of course, you can scale that up. You know, there's reasonable limits on how high you can scale that up, right? But at the low end, it's about that. The sweet spot for a target is about $1 million. That tends to be where the math just comes together really nicely, in that you sort of hit that fairly quick cash flow positivity space. So if we just played that scenario out for a minute, if you targeted about $1 million in revenue, you're usually going to experience like an aggregated all-in operational cost in the market. And I'm talking like deposits at Tmall commissions, currency exchange fees, logistics, customs duties, imports, warehousing of product, advertising spend, customer service bodies, consultancy fees, ancillary costs. All in, you're probably going to be somewhere between 35 and 45%, okay, by the end of, you know, midnight at month 12, at day 31. So if you work your way kind of as that whole process grows and you achieve about $1 million, that's sort of like that 35 to 45%, so about 350 to 450K in that first year by the time you get the whole program done, right? You're going to hit cash flow positivity around month 5 or month 6 and certainly be profitable on that model by the end of the year. If you look at the trajectory from year 1 to year 2, what we see generally speaking out of the box, if you hit the $1 million in year 1, you're on a run rate to do about $2 to $2.5 million in revenue in year 2, and your aggregated costs being fairly static on a hard dollar amount. So year 1, $1 million in revenue, let's say 400K in cost. Year 2, $2 to $2.5 million in revenue, and still about 400K in cost because you don't have your reg fees, your ROAS and your optimization is in effect. You don't have your initial capital expenditures for the build. Everything's fairly well optimized. So you're profitable in year 1, and you have the real sweet margins in year 2, and then you kind of just scale your business up beyond that. So that's where the sweet spot is, generally speaking, of what we see. You could experience and expect somewhere in like the mid 5 figures to get live, right? So you've got deposits at Tmall, which could be, you know, 8 to 15 grand. You could have a bond that's about 5 grand. So you're kind of like, you know, 15 to 20 grand just for like initial deposits there. You know, maybe you have a duty charge of 12 grand to get product in the market, a couple of $1,000 to get your warehousing set up, right? Maybe you have some consultancy fees in there as well. So, you know, things add up for sure. But that's sort of generally how the building blocks of the economics of the program work. And then every sector has just a little bit of nuance that kind of moves the needle a little bit either way.
Mm-hmm. So how many SKUs would you say would be ideal for a brand or a company to launch at a time?
Yeah, so if it's, you don't want to overcomplicate the model, and we don't want to hedge too much cash on the warehouse shelf, right? So SKUs and SKU mix translates into search and traffic. So if you go to market with one SKU, you literally need somebody inside the platforms to search for that one product or any associated keyword with that one product. Scale that on the other end. If you then go to market with 10,000 products, you've got a much larger blast radius to capture search traffic, right? Mm-hmm. But then you need to have 10,000 products and how many of each of those products on a shelf. So that can be a lot of cash. I have to just put that on the shelf, right? So too few can be a little bit of a hindrance, but then it's easier for ad spend and it's easier for cash flow for the inventory. There's usually, like for a brand that's in something like nutraceuticals or apparel that has like north of 100 SKUs, we typically say, look, let's go to market with like the top 100, but we're going to put all the effort behind the top 30 or 40, right? So like majority of ad spend, majority of efforts, KOL activity is really going to be focused on those high margin kind of top selling items where we know we're going to get conversion rates, but we use the 100 to get a bit of a net cast so that we can, capture that traffic in there. And then for brands that only really have like a dozen SKUs in the portfolio, then we go with all dozen, right? But again, maybe we're only putting major efforts behind like, the top 8 sellers.
Mm-hmm. So I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit and talk about the supply chain. So for some of the companies who are on the line, or especially in the food space, what happens to expired product that is held in a bonded warehouse?
We have to take it back to wherever it came from. And I think we need 6 months minimum. I believe it's 6 months minimum on I think anything with less than 6 months they won't take. Customs won't pass it through, and I don't think a bonded warehouse will take it.
Okay. And what if a company, already manufactures in China? What if they, don't have to ship the product to China? How does that work?
Yeah, so you want to avoid movement always, right? Because movement means cost and time and complexity. So yeah, you've got that one model whereby a Canadian company exports directly from Canada and sends it out here, and then you have other models whereby maybe there's an assembly line or a manufacturing partner inside China, and they don't want to send the product to Canada, and then you turn it back to China. So depending on what the product is and depending on the manufacturer's licensing. Most manufacturers in China are now getting licensed so they can leave the product inside China, which is a great help, because then basically what we can do is we can pick the product up directly from the manufacturing partner and bring it over to our warehouse or a warehouse in China, thus minimizing any movement of product costs and insurance across the board. If it's a facility that does not have that license, then basically what we do is we take that product, move it to a free trade zone, and then have it just basically pass through customs right then and there.
Great. So it looks like we just have time for one more question. Looks like it went by pretty quickly. So, Chinese consumers expect and respond better to creative content and messaging, that's usually tailored to their expectations. So the question is, which party, is it WPIC or is it the company brand who would be responsible for leading those initiatives?
Either or, depends how you want to arrange it, right? Like with our engagements, we try and always just bake into the cake that the brand's got final cut and control over everything. Without question, and you identified correctly, like it's a pretty hyper demanding market in terms of like content. There's definitely no set it and forget it. One must be very, very active inside the market. And so, what goes along with that is like social content, PR, general content marketing, changes to the pages on the Tmall stores and stuff like that. We do the lift, we do all that work, but at the brand's pleasure, right? So in some cases, it's a matter of, we're advising on general strategy, direction, agreeing as a group on where we should go, tactically how we should do it. But then the brand wants to have final cut, wants to read things in English before we maybe localize and translate and then publish. So we can take the lift, and then in some situations, brands are fairly well equipped to be able to do a lot of this themselves. And, that's just not something they need us to do, so they can take that in-house. So either way.
Great. So thank you, Joseph. Unfortunately, it looks like we're out of time, and it looks like we still have a few questions that have not been answered yet, but we'll try and get those answered through our follow-up email. So everybody who has participated today will receive a copy of the presentation as well as a recording of the webinar. I saw there was a few questions on that as well. So yes, you will be getting a copy of the presentation and the recording. So Joseph, I will send you the remaining questions over to you, and perhaps through the follow-up emails, we can have some of those questions answered. With that,
Sure, happy to.
Great. I'd like to thank you, Joseph, for joining us in this webinar, and appreciate you taking the time. You shared your insights with us and to help our Canadian companies fill some of the gaps on how to do business with some of the leading e-commerce platforms in China. I'm sure the audience was very interested, and based on the questions that we received through the Q&As, I think the audience felt that the presentation was extremely valuable, especially as we started thinking about selling to China. On that note, I did want to mention again, for those who are interested in moving forward with a one-on-one meeting with either Joseph or someone from his team, including Peter, who again is on standby. If you're interested in continuing a discussion or still have some questions right after the webinar, Peter is available to speak with you, just to let me know. And if not, I would be happy to help facilitate a one-on-one meeting with you and WPIC at a later date. Just to reach me by email after this webinar. And yeah, so to everybody who has joined us on the line, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to hearing your feedback on the webinar. So thank you.